Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading into a really critical situation unfolding in Dublin, Ireland. We're talking about the housing crisis.
Yeah, and our main source for this is a pretty powerful documentary. It really shines a light on the personal side of things, people navigating severe housing insecurity.
Exactly. So we looked at this documentary to really get past the numbers, the headlines, and understand the human impact for you. That's the core mission here.
Right. To unpack those personal stories and also the systemic challenges behind them, what people are actually facing day to day.
And the reality is, well, it's pretty stark. The documentary mentions around 14,000 adults and children across Ireland are homeless right now.
Which is a huge number.
It is. And to really get a handle on the complexities, we're going to focus on the experiences of people like Jordan, Jonathan, and Justin. Their stories give you that crucial on-the-ground view.
Definitely. So maybe we should start with Jordan and Jonathan and their little girl, Delilah.
Yeah, let's do that. What strikes you first about their situation?
Well, the first thing is, this wasn't about, not trying. Jonathan had a good job, a steady job as a crane operator. They were a young family, baby on the way, making plans.
Right, doing everything right, so to speak.
Exactly. And then losing their apartment just completely pulled the rug out from under them. That's what tipped them into homelessness.
It really shows how precarious things can be, doesn't it? And the documentary really lays bare the sheer difficulty of their daily life after that.
Oh, absolutely. They were bouncing between friends, relatives, relying on generosity for shelter, constant moving, constant uncertainty.
And with a baby, Delilah, you mentioned her.
Yeah, and for her, this instability was basically all she'd ever known from birth. Imagine the emotional toll on the parents, on the whole family. It's immense.
Beyond the emotional side, the practical stuff was just relentless, wasn't it?
Totally. Lack of sleep was a big one. No cooking facilities, so they're eating takeaway all the time. Unhealthy, expensive.
And that actually worsened Jonathan's diabetes, didn't it?
It did. Which just shows you those knock-on effects, right? Housing insecurity hitting physical health directly. It's all connected.
And their car became like their main base.
Pretty much. A bit of shelter, some warmth during the day, but then you've got the fuel costs.
Which must have just drained their resources.
Yeah.
Money, energy, everything.
Constantly depleted, yeah. And then trying to actually get help. That was another story.
The documentary showed them trying to access emergency accommodation.
Yeah, long queues, really late opening hours. Just getting a foot in the door for support seemed like a massive hurdle. These safety nets, they're not always easy to reach when you're desperate.
And Jordan trying to contact Dublin City Council, that sounded like a nightmare.
Emails going unanswered, hours spent on hold on the phone. You could just feel the frustration building.
Total bureaucratic maze.
And that frustration really peaked, I think, during their appointment at the housing office. They go there hoping for solutions.
And instead,
more hurdles. Told their application was incomplete. And then told the potential wait for housing could be, wait for it, 15 to 20 years.
15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
For a young family already homeless?
Devastating. It just highlights this huge gap, doesn't it? The immediate crisis they're in versus the glacial pace of the system meant to help.
But there was a positive turn eventually, thankfully.
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
They got help from someone named Connor, who we'll talk about more later. And after 10 months, 10 very long months, they secured social housing.
10 months is still a long time to be in that situation.
A very long time. But the impact of finally getting that stable housing, especially on Jonathan's health,
yeah,
it was profound.
Being able to cook properly, manage his diabetes better.
Exactly. It just reinforces how fundamental stable housing is. Not just shelter, but health, dignity, everything.
And Jordan's reflections at the end, her hopes for Delilah, it really brings it home. The relief is palpable.
It really is. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Justin's experience.
Right. Justin's story adds another layer, doesn't it? Because he'd actually been homeless before.
Yeah, a decade earlier when he was just 18. And now he's facing it again. It shows this isn't always a one-off crisis for people.
And his experience in the rental market before this latest instance, that was something else.
Wasn't it just moving 25 times in 10 years before he had a 5-year stable period? That kind of constant upheaval. It's impossible to build any security.
You can't put down roots like that.
No way. And the irony of how he became homeless this time.
Go on.
He lost his job and his accommodation at a privately run emergency shelter where he actually worked with homeless people.
You're kidding. So he was working in the system designed to help and ended up needing it himself because of that job.
Precisely. It just shows how fragile things are, even for people working within that support structure.
Wow. And he made some comment about a storage unit?
Yeah, kind of grimly observing that living in a storage unit might almost be as viable as some of the housing options actually available.
Oh,
Speaks volumes, doesn't it?
it really does. About desperation and maybe the conditions people are expected to accept.
And because he'd been through it before and worked in the sector, he felt he had a, quote, better stance for navigating the system.
Which suggests how incredibly hard it must be for someone without that inside knowledge or prior experience.
Absolutely. It's clearly a complex and difficult system to deal with.
He also talked about sleeping rough, didn't he, near the GPO?
Yeah, he recalled that time, the lack of sleep, the constant vigilance, trying to find somewhere safe, being disturbed early in the morning. It's a harsh reality.
A stark reminder of what rough sleeping actually means day to day.
And even now, though his situation is better, he's aware it could happen again, that underlying insecurity. It's pervasive for many in Dublin.
Which really brings us to the bigger picture, the Dublin housing market itself.
Yeah, and the word that comes up again and again is unaffordable. The documentary gives some pretty shocking examples.
Like what?
Well, there was an €800 a month place described as basically a long closet, a twin bedroom for €1,400 a month, a tiny studio apartment just shy of 1,000.
Just staggering figures for such basic accommodation.
And it leads to landlords, maximizing profit by renting out individual rooms or sometimes even just beds within rooms.
So you're not even renting a room, just a space for a bed.
In some cases, yeah. It shows the level of demand and, frankly, desperation in the market.
And it's not just hitting people on low incomes, right? Connor's experience.
Right. Connor and his girlfriend, both university-educated professionals, and they struggled to find even a basic one-bedroom, which was really more like a studio for under €1,000 a month.
So this crisis cuts across different demographics.
Definitely. And Connor, who's involved with People Before Profit, he pointed out that people are spending huge chunks of their income, like 30% to 50%, just on rent or mortgage.
Which leaves very little for anything else, especially with living costs going up.
Exactly. It's a massive squeeze. And you look back over the last decade, rents have just skyrocketed.
What kind of increase are we talking?
Well, an apartment that might have been €500 back in, say, 2014, now it's nearly triple that.
Wow. And the core reason?
As Connor highlighted, it really comes down to a fundamental shortage of housing supply. Not enough homes being built or available.
Which puts enormous pressure on emergency options, like the shelter Justin used to work at.
Right. That specific place had 19 rooms, temporary emergency accommodation, funded by the city, to the tune of about $1.1 million a year.
Sounds like a lot of money for 19 rooms.
It does. And when you hear Justin describe the conditions, shared kitchens, small rooms, often crowded, just a bed, maybe a small fridge, you question the quality of life there.
Especially if it's not really temporary. You mentioned people stay for years sometimes.
Yeah, Justin said some people could be there for up to 4 years, which really challenges the whole idea of it being emergency or temporary accommodation. It becomes long-term, substandard living for many.
It's a holding pattern, not a solution.
Pretty much. And then that shelter itself was sold for $3.8 million, which just underscores the big money involved in providing even this kind of basic temporary housing.
Makes you wonder if that money could be used differently for more permanent solutions.
That's the big question, isn't it? Are we investing resources in the most effective way? Which leads into the more systemic issues.
Like the historical context, the documentary mentioned the shift after the 2008 crash.
Yeah, Ireland's housing market really changed then. A big move towards a private rental market being dominant. That's had huge impacts on affordability and security for tenants.
And not enough state-owned social housing to compensate.
Exactly. There's a shortage there too.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of existing public housing units sitting empty.
Yeah.
Vacant because there isn't the capacity or funding to refurbish them quickly.
Which must be incredibly frustrating for people waiting for homes. Connor was petitioning about that, right?
He was. Trying to get those empty apartments in working-class areas brought back into use. It highlights that community-level frustration with what seems like, well, inefficiency.
Now, we also heard from Senator Mary Fitzpatrick, the governing party's housing spokesperson. What was her take?
Well, her perspective was quite different. She stated the problem is being addressed, supply is increasing, affordability measures are in place.
Okay.
And crucially, she asserted that emergency accommodation is available for everyone. Her implication seemed to be that there's really no need for anyone to be sleeping rough.
Which sounds, well, it sounds very different from what Jordan, Jonathan, and Justin actually experienced.
That's the stark contrast, isn't it? The official narrative versus the lived reality.
Mm-hmm.
They faced huge difficulties accessing any suitable accommodation, emergency or otherwise.
It makes you think about Jordan's question, what actually counts as priority for help?
Right. They had medical issues, a baby, no proper place to live. If that's not high priority, what is?
It really makes you question the criteria, or at least how they're applied on the ground. Is the system effectively identifying and helping the most vulnerable?
It certainly raises that question. There seems to be a disconnect between the policy statements and the practical reality for people desperately needing help.
So, wrapping this up, this deep dive into the documentary, it's really given us a powerful, very personal look at the human cost of Dublin's housing crisis.
Definitely. We've heard about the daily grind, the bureaucratic nightmares, the systemic problems leaving families in these incredibly precarious spots.
And hopefully by hearing about Jordan, Jonathan, and Justin, you've got a much richer sense of the challenges beyond just statistics. You've seen the real impact on real lives.
Yeah, it's about understanding the human dimension of it all.
And it leaves you with a pretty big thought, doesn't it? Considering that gap between the official line, accommodation is available, and the reality these people faced, what needs to fundamentally change?
What are the real shifts needed to tackle the root causes, not just patch things up, but create meaningful, sustainable solutions?
And what's everyone's responsibility in that? Individuals, communities, the government? How do we ensure safe, affordable housing isn't just an aspiration, but a reality for everyone?
A crucial question to ponder, for sure.